There are two expenses that you incur in life. Expenses that you can budget for and expenses that you should be insuring. How do you decide what expenses to budget for and what expenses to insure? It all comes down to probabilities. When you know with absolute certainty you'll have to pay the mortgage, pay the rent, pay the cell phone bill, you must budget for that. When you have an event where you're not quite sure you're going to incur that expense, the basement floods, you're in a car accident, God forbid, or even health care, all of those, you want to have some sort of insurance in place. Long-term care is something that sort of sits in between those two. We kind of know we're going to have that gap between health span and lifespan, so we want to budget for it, but at the same time there's a lot of uncertainty around it, so we want to have protection against it. And that's where these sorts of policies come in. They enable you to budget and save tax efficiently, but at the same time there's the principle of insurance there as well.
You and I have had a number of conversations in the past, and to touch on one of your earlier points, it's around how kind of dangerous averages can be, right? Whether it's average life expectancy, average time you need care. Average usually means that half are higher and half are lower. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, planning for the averages can be, very dangerous. I remember when I was a student, 25 years ago at the University of Maryland, I had a great statistics professor, and I learned Stats 101 from him, and he came into class on the first day of the Stats 101 lecture, and he was carrying 2 buckets of water. We're kind of wondering, shouldn't he be carrying notes or, a briefcase or something? 2 buckets, one of them is clearly filled with ice cubes. Ice cube. The other one has steaming hot water. And he takes these two, and before he talks about the curriculum or the course or anything, he puts these 2 buckets of water on stage, and he rolls up his sleeve. He was a bit of an actor. And he takes one of them hand, and he puts it into the boiling hot water. And he takes one hand, and he puts it into the freezing ice cubes, and everybody's staring at him. And he says, on average, my temperature is perfect. Averages can be very, very deceiving. So if you tell someone on average you're going to need long-term care for 1.5 years, they think, okay, I guess I can plan for that. No, but that could be 5 years, and it may be that you don't need it at all. I would not do retirement income planning based on averages, and I think that these sorts of policies that enable you to budget, but at the same time to insure, enable you to not fall prey to the fallacy of averages. Your health is not necessarily going to be a two-way street. As you age, it's unlikely that your health is going to get much, 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 much better than when you were younger. As you age, though, there's a very high probability it's going to get worse, and the question is how much worse it's going to get. With that in mind, optionality becomes even more valuable, which is why I like to view health as an asset class. Health is something that has a value, and you can actually put a number on it, and that health is something that you almost want to monetize by going out and getting things that'll value your great health. Once that great health is deteriorated at more advanced years, it's going to be harder to monetize that and qualify for things and get some sort of coverage or policy. So early on not only keeps your options open, which we all understand is valuable, early on also enables you to quantify and capitalize on something we all know to be true. Health is an asset class. Let's put a number on it, and let's take advantage of it. Buy things that'll make things cheaper. And this applies in life insurance as well. I tell my 25-year-old students, they may not have any children, they may not have a family. One day they will. They're in great health now. Go out and get that 30-year policy. But I don't need insurance now. That's not about what you need now. It's about what you're going to need in the future and what we know is going to happen to health as an asset class over time.
Yeah, that's a great point, because essentially we could all be potentially one doctor's appointment away from being uninsurable, and just sort of thinking about the fact you're going to need it later, and that's the exact reason you should be buying it today.
Yeah, Heather, what we say in the actuarial world is that jump process is down only.
Yes.
Nobody goes to the doctor and says, unbelievable, we got 10 more years of life, right? It's always in the other direction. I don't know, this is negative and this is negative. It's like, if that's the trend in which it's going, why not capitalize it while you know you still have it? I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer. This is almost like health arbitrage, right? It's health arbitrage.
Let's transition over to how a long-term care event can impact somebody's portfolio. Can you take a minute and share a little bit about how that event can impact somebody's portfolio and retirement income?
Well, Bill, and I don't want to make light of it, but it's not good news, right? I mean, that event is not going to be good news for the portfolio. The portfolio won't be happy, to use a colloquial term. But I think that what happens is that once you have that in the background, and we talked earlier about the confidence of being able to take risk, there's a number of things that you can do with your portfolio in retirement once you have that in place that you couldn't have done otherwise. And number one, I think very important, is the spending rate problem. You know, when we get to retirement, one of the biggest challenges, how much can I pull out of this nest egg? We've heard of the 4% rule. We've heard of it being reduced because of lower interest rates. The ability to take that off the table and say, well, if that long-term care event happens, I have that policy in place, might enable you to spend more and to spend more confidently. So number one, the change in the portfolio is you're going to be able to spend more early on because you have that in place. I think that's number one, and that's important. Second, to the point of the portfolio, by having that in place, in some sense you can take a little bit more risk. Because one of the things that we worry, and by risk I mean financial risk, and obviously I'm not giving financial advice here, but what I'm trying to say is the concern that you may have an LTC event at the same time that the market is down, the sequence of returns effect, or the sequence of LTC effect, if we can coin a term. I'm going to have an LTC event, the market is down. Once you have that product in place, you know that you're not going to have to tap the nest egg for that. There's something that's there as well. So all of this moves in the exact same direction. The ability to more confidently withdraw more, and have an allocation that doesn't have to worry about some of these other factors.
Yeah, I've been doing this for 30 years, working with financial professionals, and it's a rarity that I hear we've saved too much for retirement, right? My clients. So when all of a sudden you're focused on delivering an income, and unexpectedly you're hit with $100,000 additional expense, it can have real negative impacts on the portfolio, and not to mention what's left for the second spouse or the heirs down the road.
Yeah, it's also about mental accounting as well. You know, this is meant for the vacations and the fun stuff. You know, and we want to segregate. This is the fun money, and this is the money that's going to be used for when things aren't as fun and we need help. And to be able to do that within a tax-efficient, pooled solution, right? I mean, part of this is the community effect of pooling. You're putting money in. It's not the insurance company that's paying. It's we're having a bunch of people being managed by the insurance company. And I think all of that, you know, gives more confidence. You can manage the rest of your portfolio with greater ease. What happens when you're saving money towards a goal and that money is sitting in a taxable account is every single year you have to pay your tax. And what that means is that's not going to compound at a very high rate. So as you can see on the screen, if I can walk through this and put on my professor hat for 60 seconds, let's imagine that you're investing, and this is hypothetical of course, at 6%. You're investing at 6%, but every single year the 6% coupon that you're getting from the bond or the 6% interest you're getting in the bank is getting taxed, which means that you're not really getting 6%. You're not getting to spend 6%. You're getting to spend the after-tax value. And that's what that 1 minus 30% is. 30% is going to the federal government. You're going to keep 70%. So it's not really compounding at 6% a year. It's compounding at 70% of that. And if you compound to 25 years, that's going to grow to, as you can see on the screen, $2.8. That's the math of every single year paying your tax bill. On the other hand, if you're able to find some way to invest at that exact same 6%, but for those 25 years, you don't have to worry about paying the tax along the way. Even if you pay it at the very end when you pull the money out, even if you pull it, by the fact that it's compounding at the 6% and you only have to pay that tax of 30% at the very end and you keep the 70%, you end up with $3.3. I mean, this is just pure algebra. 2.8 when you have to pay tax every single year, 3.3 when you pay tax at the very end. The advantage of saving for that long-term care event inside of a policy where you only pay tax at the end is the difference between the 3.3 and the 2.8. That's about 18%. And that's understating the case. That's understating the case. If, in fact, you can pull the money out because it's for a long-term care event and you don't have to pay any tax at all, then what happens is that that money grows to even more because you don't have to give away the 30%. That's a tax advantage that has absolutely nothing to do with risk and insurance. It's something that you're able to do that's been granted to you by the fact that this is tax sheltered. And I think it's very important for especially high net worth people to understand. You're getting two things right here. You're getting the ability to save money in something that's only going to be taxed in the end, if at all. Number two, you're also protecting against risk. So when someone says, well, I can self-insure, I say, well, you can self-insure risk, but what about self-insuring taxes? How are you going to do that? And I think that that's something that has to be taken into account. If I can just elaborate for 30 more seconds, what you're seeing on the table on the screen is how that is impacted by the time horizon. Some people might say, well, I'm not going to be doing this for 20 years. I'm going to be doing it for 10 years, or maybe only for 5 years. Others might say, no, it's going to be for 35 years. So as you can see, when you have no taxes at all, the argument makes no sense. If we all could live in a world with no taxes, you see a bunch of zeros on the screen, there's no advantage to this tax-sheltered growth. But if you go to the next screen and you have someone that is taking out money and not having to pay tax at all, because this is a long-term care event and they can withdraw money from the policy, but when the money is inside the shelter, they have to pay tax. The advantage, if you look at the rightmost column, is going to be somewhere between 20 and 25%. That's something that's very difficult to achieve outside. So I think this gets to the point of self-insurance. It takes away from what this product is doing. There's an insurance element, also tax-sheltered growth.
Two things on that. One, I was pretty excited I could take pi out about 1 or 2 digits until I saw your first slide. So puts that in perspective. Number two, when people look at long-term care planning and a solution, many times they discount the fact that this is a 20, 25, 30-year process before you need it, and that power of compounding is a big, big deal. So great slide and great insight.
And Bill, just to your point, there's also the tax uncertainty. You know, spreadsheets give us this false sense of security. Well, and if in 30 years from now taxes are this, do we really know what they're going to be? Are they going to be higher? Are they going to be low? I can assure you they're not going to be zero in the non-tax shelter. So I think that part of this is just eliminating the tax uncertainty. I don't have to worry about every single year what my tax rate is going to be, and now I've got to pay more. You've eliminated tax uncertainty, and you have tax compound growth. And I think that that's an important aspect of LTC that I don't think it gets enough play, this notion of, remember, there's the tax shelter involved as well.
One of the questions I get a lot is, if I'm worth a little bit more and I can self-insure, why should I buy a long-term care solution? How would you answer that question?
You know, well, that's a great question, and to be perfectly honest, until we started talking to each other a couple of months ago, I was in that category as well. I sort of looked at this whole thing and said, do I really need to insure this? I can self-insure. But I think that there are a number of important aspects to LTC and the LTC solution that sort of take away the idea of self-insurance the way we think of some other risks. I think number one, and we can get into that, is the tax-sheltered growth. And I think that's a very, very important aspect, and we can talk about that a little bit later, on what happens when you have money growing inside a policy that's growing in a tax-sheltered manner, and you can pull the money out also without paying any tax, or even if you do, at least it was sheltered. I think that's number one, is a very important aspect. I think number two, you know, there are certain risks in life that are very clear-cut. This event happens, this event doesn't happen, you know whether you have the expense. I think that when it comes to long-term care, you're more likely to take care of yourself when you have such a policy, and I think that that's a psychological aspect that sometimes the numbers don't necessarily give you. It's like, well, mathematically maybe self-insure, but there's a lot more going on than just the mathematics as well. I think another aspect of this is the discipline that comes from being able to do this. You know, the way I would say it is, to be honest, why not take advantage of a tax advantage if it's there? Right? I mean, it's there for you. This has nothing to do with, you know, whether you can afford to take care of this risk yourself. So my short answer is, I thought like that too, not anymore. But I also think that there's a lot of value to the process of having to file the paperwork and to keep track of where the money is going and to make sure it's paying for things appropriately. It imposes a certain amount of discipline. So, you know, you've got to submit a bill in order to get paid, which means that that service is going to be provided. I mean, all the parents love their kids and all kids love their parents. But, you know, let's be honest, there's a bit of an asymmetry of incentives there. You want to get reimbursed for that, something has to actually be done. So there are a lot of these psychological, gerontological benefits, and I think that all of that creates a discipline in place, and you actually will use it. It reduces the gap between the service you really want and the activity that's going to get compensated. Yeah, go out and hire that physiotherapist, otherwise you won't get paid, as opposed to, I can't walk to the bathtub, I'm going to get paid. So in some sense, the response to your question is, mathematically, indemnity is better. In practice, there are a lot of reasons to say, I think I like the reimbursement idea. I think in some sense it may even induce people to take better care of themselves, because you show the receipt, you'll get it. So all in all, my short response is, indemnity is more expensive, but I see value to reimbursement.
Those are excellent points. These types of services really help those families to manage the administrative needs more easily because there's that accounting that needs to happen. So also you don't have to worry if the checks weren't sent or the bills weren't paid, because frequently you have that opportunity in a reimbursement space that actually the carrier has the ability to have the bills come directly to them, and they pay them on behalf of the insured.
And Heather, that's a very good point, getting to the earlier comment about leverage. You're able to leverage their expertise in this bewildering maze of healthcare provision. It's not just about getting the money. You know, we tend to think that money solves everything. As soon as I get the money, the problem is solved. How many times have we thrown money at problems and it didn't solve it? And I think by having access to that network and having access to the experts who tell you this is how you do it,